Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go through the first steps of using the Seqera nodes. So if you head over to this node-red-seqera website, again, you can see all the instructions and everything in the documentation here if you'd rather follow in text. And I'm going to be going through the Seqera config node and then launch and monitoring workflows in this video. So if I hop into a fresh install here running off Docker locally, you can see that I've got all these examples which have been put onto the canvas for me to look at. And as I mentioned at the end of the last video, if you have a little red triangle here, it means that something's not configured properly. All of the Seqera nodes need some level of configuration so they know how to communicate with Seqera Platform. If I double click any of these, you'll see that at the top, they all say Seqera config. At the moment, when you have a new installation, you don't have any config at all, so I have to click the plus button here. That's going to take me somewhere that looks like this, where I put in the base URL. If you're using Seqera Cloud, then you can just leave that as a default. If you have an enterprise installation of Seqera Platform, you put in your own custom API here. Then I need an API token to be able to communicate with the API. This is a link, so I'm going to click this. I'm going to go to add token, and I'm going to type in node-red demo. Nov 2025. And I'm going to copy this. Don't worry, I will have deleted this by the time you watch this video. And I'm going to hop back here and type in bearer token. As soon as I put something in here, it does a connectivity check to make sure that the API key looks valid. And sure enough, it tells me that it worked and I'm connected, and that's my username. The final thing I need to do is select a default workspace that I want to run in. In Seqera Platform, you have all these different workspaces which you can configure. I have quite a lot. The one I use for demos is called Seqera Bioinfo Wizards. So I'm going to look for that. Here it is, and select pipeline testing. Okay, click add. I've added a configuration now into Node-RED, and it will be selected up at the top for this node. I can click done. And now if I go into any of these other nodes, you can see where it says Seqera config. Now there's a drop down and I can choose that config option. And this node is no longer invalid. Okay, that was Seqera config, not so difficult. I'm going to just hop on and import a new example now. So go to import examples like I showed in the last video, and I'm going to do the first one, simple launch and monitor, to talk about how the nodes work to launch and monitor pipelines. I'm going to delete this first flow and select here these ones and choose the config that I've just created. Okay. Okay, now I've set the config. I'm going to hit deploy to effectively sort of save that configuration. Now, there are a few more things I need to do before I can actually run this workflow. I need to tell Node-RED and the Seqera API which pipeline I want to launch. If I drop into Seqera Platform, you can see in this workspace I have a bunch of different pipelines configured in the Launchpad. You still need to do this. This is where you set the GitHub URL, the branch, any default parameters, and then other options and config settings in here. Now, when I go back, I'm going to double click on the launch workflow. I've got the config set and I've clicked deploy, so it's already kind of set in the back end. Now I can type in here, and if I choose, I want to run chipseek. If I start typing, it should give me a suggestion of a different pipeline names. I can select chipseek. Okay, the other options here are hopefully relatively self-explanatory. I can choose a run name, or this is the Node-RED name for Node-RED. If I want to resume a pipeline, I can do something here. I'll show that in a minute. And then I can set the input parameters either as a JSON object. This has been done by default here, or in this interface here. So I can type in outdir and set it to string results. Or I could also set, I don't know, what else would I like to set? Email goes to message payload. So you can see that I can set these parameters dynamically to different inputs that I provide to the node. I'm just going to set that to an empty JSON object. And these are merged iteratively. So these ones take priority after the parameters.json, and these are then merged on top of the parameters that I might have set in the Launchpad. So they're kind of one after another. Okay, and I'm going to click done. In the Launchpad, I think I have the profile test set, so that's okay. I've got inputs and everything there. And I should set the message.payload goes to my email address, phil.yours, just to make the example make sense. Great. I'm going to click deploy. There's pretty much all I need to do actually. Now, if I click this node and go to the help, it describes all the different inputs we've just talked about, and the outputs, it has two. So this single node here has two different variables coming out of it for every event. It has message.payload, which gives the entire launch response from the API, so I can pull out all the different information that I might need for any custom downstream processing. And it has another variable called message.workflow ID, which is a convenience variable, which just has the ID of the workflow that was launched. Now, in the monitor workflow, one of the inputs I can give it to in this input here is workflow ID. And by default, you can see it's set to message.workflow ID. So this is configured this way so that normally you can just drag and drop and connect, launch, and monitor workflows, and they'll flow from one to the next automatically. The other settings you can all leave as default. We've got the config set. It's going to keep polling for the status until it concludes, and it's going to check Seqera Platform every 15 seconds. Great. Launch only had one output. Launch just is a one-off event. It just launches the pipeline when it's done. Monitoring keeps polling, and every time it does a poll, it has a different characteristic. The top output always fires. It's a status. It just tells you what's going on. The bottom two only fire when the workflow is finished. The middle one is when it finishes with a success state, and the bottom one is when it finishes with some kind of error. And so you can see how you can wire up different flows here to do different behaviors based on what's happened with the pipeline. So I'm going to change the example slightly. I'm going to add an extra debug node. I'm going to delete that connection. Let's call this one success, and call this one fail. And then we'll be able to see which of these it goes to when we run the pipeline. Okay, I'm going to click deploy, and I'm going to bring up the debug message here. Oops. And as I've said in the intro, in the previous video, I'm using an inject node here just to test it, so I can click it manually. But normally you would have some kind of automation here, some kind of input event to trigger the launch of a workflow. I'm going to click go. I have a little status thing here saying what's happening with this node, when it was last updated. And you can see it said launching briefly, and now it says launched. If I go to runs in Seqera Platform, you can see, sure enough, it's been submitted, and I've called chipseq. So this pipeline is now running. It's been launched successfully by Node-RED. Now this node is going to sit here, and it's going to continuously pull that status. And you can see that the debug object is now having an output here every 15 seconds, every time it polls for an update, and that's going out the top event here. You can see it also says the latest status down here, which is submitted. Now, I'm too lazy to wait for this to actually run for a demo, so I'm going to cancel it. If I go into Seqera Platform and click cancel run, I go back, that should trigger an error here when it does the next poll, which will be anywhere up to 15 seconds. And we'll keep an eye on this status here. Okay, it went to grey and said cancelled, and we've got an output here, and sure enough, it came from a debug node, which is called fail, which is connected to that bottom one. So that worked. That was our first functional Node-RED flow interacting with Seqera Platform. Hopefully you can see that it's not too complex, it's not too much clicking. Everything is kind of set up for convenience where it auto-selects things and auto-suggests things. And it's really just a question of linking up all the different logic that you want in order to automate your pipeline runs. We could have different inputs here, which could run as a cron job or launching pipelines on, I don't know, all kinds of things like Slack messages or and in one of the next videos, we're going to talk about how you can trigger based on the presence of a new file in storage. Or if we bring in different plugins for AWS, we could listen to EventBridge or Google or Azure or Jira or GitHub or almost anything you can think of. Any event you can use as a trigger to launch a pipeline. We just have to have some event hitting the launch workflow node. Likewise, you can see all of these outputs could go into any different third-party integration you can possibly think of. There's also generic ones in here, such as webhook. For example, we can just listen to a WebSocket And then there's also kind of web requests, HTTP in and responses. So those are other ways which are generic integrations to set up if there is no plugin. Great. Join us in the next video and we'll talk about some of the other node types that we have in the Seqera plugin.